Lucky the Hard Way. Written by Deborah Coonts. Narrated by Patricia Santamasso. Lucky the Hard Way. Written by Deborah Coonts. Narrated by Patricia Santamasso. Chapter 1. Too many questions, no easy answers, and no one to shoot. Not exactly a great Christmas. Okay, I didn't really want to perforate someone. Not on Christmas. To be honest, I'm not exactly a point-and-shoot kind of gal anyway. Probably a good thing, since the woman standing in front of me was campaigning hard for a spot in the crosshairs. This is where that concealed carry permit, had I had one, could have gotten us both into trouble. But there was a difference between imagining shooting someone and wanting to see that person dead. One a euphemism, one a finality. So don't take me too seriously. I'm known for talking a talk I could never walk, a shortcoming I've learned to carry with shame. Miss Minnie, the aforementioned woman standing in front of me, was the proprietress of Miss Minnie's Magic Massage, and one of the most difficult people I know, which was saying a lot. Dealing with difficult people all day, every day, was at the core of my job description. But when I was off the clock, well, that just seemed wrong. In a questionable neighborhood on the opposite side of Interstate 15, Miss Minnie's was light years away from my hood, the glamour and glitz of the Las Vegas Strip. A long, narrow retail space, it was a perfect layout, with closed rooms on either side of a narrow hallway, a laminated counter up front, chipped and stained, and a threadbare couch pushed up against the wall as an afterthought. Muted music thumped from the rooms. I blocked out the other, more human sounds. As with most things in Vegas, Miss Minnie's hid reality behind the thick whitewash of a fantasy. I was raised in a whorehouse. I could smell them a mile away. The cloying scent of sex masked by ammonia and room deodorizers. A noxious combination to churn even the most ironclad stomach. Minnie's girls worked as independent contractors, another clue. Alone with a client behind closed doors, each girl could negotiate her own deal. Business dealings repeated multiple times in parking lots of the strip clubs and in hotel rooms all over town. Most of Minnie's girls chose the profession, or so my mother told me, and she was somewhat of an expert. They weren't the ones I worried about when the noise of life quieted and daylight thinned. But they were not why I was here. Not tonight. Tonight, I needed help. The Miss Minnies of the world were parasites capitalizing on human frailty. Of course, I ran a casino, so who was I to judge? Before I slipped out onto that slippery slope and outlawed gambling, drinking, and other excesses, thereby turning Nevada into Utah, I reined myself in and tabled that bit of unnerving parallelism. Using my 10-inch and 50-pound advantage, I stared down Miss Minnie, willing her to break. One of the junkyard dogs of the human race with a bite worse than her bark, she met me glare for glare. A walking fashion faux pas, tonight Miss Minnie channeled her geisha gone wild look, with my apologies to geishas everywhere. She looked like a silk-encased human hot dog. The sheath of delicate fabric captured her Himalayan breasts several inches shy of respectability, then tapered to a tight opening at her ankles. The seams held, defying every law of physics. With her stride silk limited to about 6 inches and teetering on platform shoes, Miss Minnie had no choice but to hold her ground, which she did with tilted chin and fists planted on either hip. A white face, the powder cracking and flaking, and a jet-black wig appropriately styled and lacquered completed the look. And the flashing pink of the faded sign in the window added a comical color, but this visit was anything but funny. Her red bow-tie mouth knotted tight, and her dark eyes throwing daggers, she met me stare for stare as anger rolled off her in waves. Wasn't anger outlawed on Christmas? Minnie, you know why I'm here. I need your help. I cringed as I said it. The last person on the planet I wanted to owe was Minnie, a high-ranking priestess in the cult of paybacks or hell. My name is Lucky O'Toole, and as the vice president of customer relations for the Babylon, Vegas's most over-the-top strip casino resort, I was slumming, but for a good cause. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But I wasn't an easy sell. As Christmas night wound toward an end, I wasn't at all pleased to have been lured out of my bit of the jungle, especially with a warm bed and a hot French chef waiting for me. "You bring man who killed my Sam, and I help you." Minnie's staccato delivery perforated my veneer of civility, thin as it was. As I worked to hold on to my notoriously absent patience and regain my thick shield of self-delusion, I stared at Minnie, and I wondered how she stayed in business. One look at Minnie, and any self-respecting male should turn and run. There was a warning in that thought somewhere, but I chose to ignore it. "Irv Giddings shot Sam," I said, telling her what she already knew. "You know I'd gladly risk 20 to life to shoot Mr. Giddings myself, but I have a minor problem. I need to find him first. That's where you come in." "Me?" Miss Minnie's voice rose on a wave of forced incredulity. "What I know?" Despite knowing her well, Minnie didn't scare me much. I seemed to have the same effect on her. Familiarity breeding contempt and all of that. "Minnie, Irv Giddings hopped a private jet with your husband." "He not my husband anymore." A faraway look lit her eyes for a moment. A look I couldn't exactly read, other than I saw a hint of homicidal and terrible hurt. The Madam and the Diplomat, a B-movie if there ever was one. I doubted it played well in halls of power in Beijing. Your daughter Kim was along for the ride too. Don't you want me to find her? Miss Minnie flicked a glance my way. I'd say it was inscrutable, but that would be cliché and bordering on non-PC, wouldn't it? Not that I didn't normally blow right through those boundaries. "Kim, girl? Bah!" From her tone and puckered mouth, I actually thought she might spit. Thankfully, I was wrong. "Girl's no good for nothing but trouble." I couldn't argue, other than with her double negative. Kimberly Cho, Miss Minnie's daughter, a recent revelation that still had me a bit on my heels, had run me in circles in my own town, played me for a chump, and then had hot-footed with her father and Irv Giddings, a wart on the ass of humanity. Last I heard they were headed to Macau. I threw that out there, a hook perhaps to catch Minnie's complicity. Her pupils pinpointed. "Then why you need me? You already know where they go." Macau is a maze. Tiny winding streets, thousands of minuscule apartments, a spot of an island with 600,000 people on it. Taking a deep breath and counting to 10, I worked to not wring the life out of Miss Minnie. Truth of it was, I needed a lead, and she was the best hope I had. Yep, a new low. Life was trying to teach me something. Either that or Santa had a huge bitch streak. 3 needles in a very large haystack. You can tell me exactly where to start digging. Minnie burbled like a tea kettle ready to boil. I braced myself. "You killed Sam!" she shrieked, as she launched herself at me with a growl, trying to rake me with pointed talons. Actually, she didn't launch herself so much as lean like a small tree felled in the forest. I stepped to the side and watched as she face-planted on the carpet that probably hadn't been visited by a cleaner since it left the factory. And I'd thought this was going so well. A landed carp, she wiggled and thrashed, trying to throw her bound body over. Curiously detached, I watched and marveled at the incongruity of my life. This was my Christmas. A life intervention. That's what I needed. And I'd thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. But that was before Teddie came back. Then everything had gone on tilt, and I hadn't found my footing since. Miss Minnie flopped a few more times, then quit. The floor was as far as she would get without help. Bending, I grabbed her, pinning her arms at her sides, and lifted her up. A tiny human, she was as light as she looked, which was a good thing. While I could throw my weight around, I wasn't as strong as my size might lead one to believe. Intimidation, rather than force, was my game. I held her while she fought, making sure to keep out of the reach of her teeth. One wooden-soled shoe connected with my shin, evaporating my thin veneer of restraint. I carried her to a small couch in the corner of the vestibule and tossed her down, her geisha finery immobilizing her better than I could have. One breast escaped and fell like an underinflated water balloon. That was a bit more of Minnie than I needed. She didn't appear concerned. Instead, she struggled to lean forward, scooching to the edge of the couch to get her weight over her feet. Each time she almost got there, I pushed her back. Finally, she tired of the game. "You killed Sam." Her voice had lost its fight. Now she sounded like a mother who had lost her son, which she was. I didn't feel bad about the shooting Sam part, but my heart constricted for the mother losing a son part. No matter how bad the child, a mother was always a mother, or so my own mother, Mona, told me. But Mona couldn't always be trusted. In a logic kind of mood, I gave it a shot, knowing full well reason never trumped emotion. But hope springs eternal and all of that. Irv Giddings shot Sam, and Sam had it coming. Considering Sam had killed Holt Box, effectively ending a country and western comeback story, and then had framed Teddie for the murder, I wasn't feeling at all charitable toward the former Sam Cho. He also then attempted to kill both my father and me, thereby solidifying his name close to the top of my shit list. Irv Giddings had earned a permanent place in the top spot, but that was a long story. This time, Miss Minnie spat, narrowly missing my left foot. "You know nothing. Sam a good boy." "Sure. All the good boys I know try to kill people." No logic in that. And it dawned on me that I really didn't have the time to soften up Miss Minnie, if that was even possible. Or maybe I didn't want to take the time. Whatever. Time to play my ace. I have Frank. Frank was Sam's brother, Miss Minnie's second son, and the Dr. Jekyll to Sam's Mr. Hyde. "You'll bring Frank?" A glimmer of interest, which fanned the flames of my hope. "Maybe," I told her, not feeling at all remorseful about the lie. Her narrowed-eyed look told me she didn't trust me. I knew how she felt. I didn't trust me either. Frank was a guest of the Silver State at the High Desert State Prison outside of Indian Springs, 46 miles north of Las Vegas, so him being the good son was relative. My cohort, Detective Romeo, a detective in training, my characterization, not his, for the Metropolitan Police Department, was working on remanding Frank to my care, but his mother didn't need to know that. Frank would be my bargaining chip in Macau. His mother didn't need to know that either. My plan was to bring Kimberly Cho back, find a way to rid the world of Mr. Giddings without taking the fall for it, and do the same to Mr. Cho if it turned out he was behind the recent assassination attempt on my father. What can I say? I'm an overachiever. And then there was Teddie to think about. Teddie. But before I went all vigilante, I needed some information. You need to tell me what game your ex-husband and your daughter are playing. Why you think I know? I gave her the what-do-you-take-me-for look. She didn't buy it. What make you think anybody tell Minnie anything? I just a small business owner. That was like calling a great white just another shark. Logic clearly wasn't the winning gambit. Stupidity, I guess. Keeping an eye on Miss Minnie, I glanced around the entrance area to the massage parlor. Faded carpet, unraveling in places, with a dark track from the door to the counter, then continuing around the desk and down the long hallway toward the back. Large windows fogged with dirt, a pink neon sign blinking from high in the corner, the sizzle of aging bulbs audible above the low thumping music from the back. The place reeked of sexual desperation. I still didn't understand the whole prostitution thing. Never would. But I'd learned enough about human peccadillos to read Minnie like a book. To be honest, Minnie, I don't even know why I'm here. Really stupid of me to think you might know something, that you might be able to help me find your daughter and stop her father. I gave her the benefit of my full attention. I mean, really, who would tell you anything? You're right. I'm sorry I bothered you. I moved toward the door, but I didn't turn my back on her. A rabid dog, she was waiting for the chance to bite me in the ass. You bring my son home? She managed to stand, weaving a bit before finding her balance. You give me back Frank? One hand on the door, I paused. It depends. What do you have to trade? She eyed me, a butcher weighing meat on the hoof. I countered with my best I'm out of here attitude. At a momentary impasse, I called her bluff. Showing her my back, I pushed the door open. Wait! I wiped the gloat off my face before I turned. The large glass storefront to my right exploded. Instinctively, I flinched away, my arms covering my head, my face tucked to the side. Ducking down, I waited for the next shot. It didn't come. Outside, tires squealed. I looked up in time to see brake lights flash as a car turned, fishtailed onto the road, and then disappeared into the darkness. The hallway doors opened, disgorging girls and guys in various stages of undress, excitedly chattering. "Get back!" Still in a crouch, I motioned them to stop. "Go back to what you were doing. Excitement's over." My unfortunate choice of words actually amused me. Sex one paid for couldn't be exciting, at least not by my standards. They hovered barely inside the hallway, but at least they didn't step out into the open. "Minnie, you okay?" Standing, I brushed my slacks down as I kept my eyes looking out the window for more shooters. The fact that I was more pissed than scared probably should bother me, but frankly, being shot at had gotten to be a bit old hat. Miss Minnie didn't answer. One of the girls stepped around the corner. With a hand to her mouth, she screamed. I swiveled to look. Slumped on the couch, Miss Minnie's eyes were wide, her mouth slack. She pressed a hand to her chest. Blood seeped through her fingers. Shit. I grabbed a towel from the front desk. Kneeling beside her, I gently moved her hands. Pressing the towel to the neat little hole, I then put her hands on the cloth. Her eyes followed me. "Hold this, okay?" I felt her hands press down. Not much, but enough. "You shoot me?" Her ragged voice held the hint of respect. What a world she lived in. "Don't be silly. I need you. When I don't need you anymore, then I'll shoot you." I hit the emergency button on my iPhone. When the 911 dispatcher answered, I barked instructions. Finished, I left the call open, but put the phone down, turning back to Miss Minnie. "You're a real funny girl," she gasped. "And I'm the best hope you have to get your kids back. And I don't know what game your ex is playing, but I'd hazard a guess it isn't for your benefit." Even through the haze of pain, she looked like she was mulling that over. "Besides, my father would kill me if I shot you now." That got a hint of a reaction. She and the big boss went way back to old Vegas when the mob ran the town. Hard times bred unusual friendships. "Your father a good man." The look on her face told me she didn't think he'd passed on that bit of DNA to his daughter. "I know." I put my hand on top of hers and added pressure. She covered mine with her other hand. "You remember that?" That struck me as odd, but now was not the time to go into it. "Of course. Who did this?" "It not matter. Many old, tired." She worked to pull in a deep breath. "In Macau, you find Sinjin. He help you." Sinjin? He have a last name? She pursed her lips like that was a stupid question. I wasn't going to argue. "How do I find him?" Her voice grew weaker. "Maybe he find you. Sinjin know everything." I could feel her blood, warm and thick, leaking through the towel. "Okay, I'll find Sinjin. Be quiet now." Sirens sounded in the distance, quickly growing louder. "Stay with me. Just a minute or two more." Sinjin knows everything. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I couldn't. She would expend her last bit of energy trying to tell me, and then she would die. Not a fair trade. Still, I only considered it for a nanosecond. A victory, considering the task ahead. I'm not normally quite so virtuous. Did Sinjin have all the answers? Is that what she meant when she said he knew everything? God, I hoped so. But I also knew better. Life never was that easy. At least, not mine. As the ambulance skidded to a stop in front, its strobing lights painting the walls red, her eyelids fluttered, then closed. "Minnie!" She didn't answer. A thready pulse beat under the 2 fingers I pressed to the hollow of her neck, and I breathed a sigh. An EMT brushed me aside with a muttered thank you, his hands replacing mine as his coworker took Miss Minnie's vitals. "What happened?" "Drive-by shooting. 1 gunshot." His eyes flicked to mine. They were blue. Recognition flared. We'd met before. That time it had been a bomb. "Lucky." The way he said my name, well, it sounded a bit ironic. I knew what he meant. When my mother named me Lucky, she'd unknowingly invited the fates to prove her wrong. Apparently, they'd accepted her invitation. Hey. I couldn't remember his name, if I'd ever known it. I felt sure I had, but my brain had reached capacity years ago, and so far, I hadn't found anything worth forgetting so I could remember him. He was cute, but cute only got you a second look, not a permanent place in the gray matter. He turned back to his work. "When are you going out to dinner with me?" He was pressing, blood was oozing. Miss Minnie still hadn't opened her eyes. "Seriously? A woman is dying and you're thinking about a dinner date?" I looked at him, bug-eyed. Men were scary. Mona had told me that how many times? She'd phrased it a bit more delicately. Something along the lines of men were different. But this was the first time I understood she had been underselling her theory. "She's not dying," he said. "I'm engaged." "You're not married." "She's crashing," the other EMT said, his voice calm, his demeanor not so much. The banter fell away. Giving them room to work, I crossed my arms and stepped out of the way. A few of the girls eased closer, angling for a look. My glare sent them scurrying back to their rooms. Who would want to kill Minnie? The list was probably long, but standing there, with her blood on my hands, killing became all too real in its horror, and I couldn't think of anyone who would want to do that, including me, even when it came to Irv Giddings. I talked a big game, sure, but all in all, I'd rather someone else be responsible for the rope, the hood, and pulling the lever to drop the trap door. I worried a button on my sweater that had already hung by a thread. It popped off in my hand, and I hurled it through the broken window. At a loss as to who to call, what to do, I lapsed into my normal state, pissed off. If I could only get my hands around Irv Giddings' neck. I wouldn't kill him, that I'd leave to the pros, but I wasn't above making him wish he was dead. Someone had shot Minnie. The thought that had angered me before now took my breath. While I didn't like her, I respected her, which was more important. A woman hacking and slashing her way through a man's world and teaching them how the game was played, she was a force. A lot like my mother. Of course, I would never tell Mona I respected her. She'd punish me forever. The night air sent shivers through me, or maybe it was the breath of death, cold and close. As I pulled my sweater tight around me, I noticed frayed threads. A closer look. The threads bracketed a tear. I looked at the window, remembering where I'd stood. Then a glance at Minnie. The bullet had grazed my shoulder. That close. I guess I had been a good girl after all, or at least had enough karma points to trade for a little more time. But Minnie? Why Minnie? She ran a semi-respectable business, which was far above the norm in Vegas. As far as I knew, and as a well-connected native Vegas casino brat, that was a lot. Minnie kept her nose clean, steered clear of trouble, and paid off the right folks. So why would someone want her dead? Chapter 2. Christmas. Okay, technically it now was the day after Christmas, but I hadn't had a Christmas yet, and I was enough of a kid to hold that against the fates. I'd asked Santa for a sexy Frenchman and his skivvies, my kind of package. But instead of getting what I asked for, I'd gotten an attempted murder in a whorehouse masquerading as a massage parlor, and a night talking to the cops. Clearly, when it had come to the naughty or nice thing, I'd fallen on the wrong side of that line. I planned on holding that against the fates as well. But I was alive, so there was that. Yes, I had lost my Christmas cheer, which wasn't unusual. Cheery was not an adjective anyone would include in my epitaph. Living down to expectations, it's what I do. The Metropolitan Police Department, Metro to those of us who held it in low esteem, and deservedly so, had kept us for hours. Thankfully, Detective Romeo had ridden to my rescue and busted me out early. Miss Minnie was still hanging on, but when I'd checked an hour or so ago, the doctor had said it would be touch and go once she came out of surgery. Nothing to do but go home. Home. A lantern in the storm. The streets of Summerlin were quiet, everyone sleeping off Christmas. One neighbor already had put his tree to the curb, decorations and all. I didn't even want to think about what had precipitated that. I'd had enough sad for the night. My borrowed red Ferrari easily recognizable, the guard waved me through the gate. The garage light clicked on as the door rose. I still couldn't reconcile my life with a house in the suburbs, a fiancé, a future stepchild, and a garage door clicker with the me I used to be. Funny that. Life choices. The suburbs or the strip? Jean-Charles or Teddie? And why did choosing one always mean losing the other? Tiptoeing through the mudroom into the kitchen, I tried to be quiet as I set down my keys and purse. The lingering aromas of dinner, something Italian maybe, curled around me. Toys littered the floor. A game of Operation had been shoved to the side of the large country table. 4 place settings. Mine still had a knife and fork atop a clean napkin folded, waiting. I felt the guilty prick of unmet expectations. The strains of Moonlight Sonata led me to the bar off the kitchen. Jean-Charles had waited up for me. He stood in front of the fire, attired as I'd asked for, his hands clasped behind his back, worry pinching the skin between his eyebrows into a slight frown. His eyes closed, he swayed to the music, lost in it. A few inches taller than my 6 feet, my fiancé, yes, my fiancé, had waited and worried, making me feel lucky indeed. The fates be damned. To be honest, I still couldn't get used to the idea of getting married, and to such a man. Tall enough, as I said, trim in all the right places, with full lips, chiseled features, wavy brown hair he wore just a trifle long, and a smile that lit his robin's egg blue eyes. It was a feast for sure. And he could cook. An added benefit, since I'd never been known to pass up a meal. But it was the way he looked at me, the way he listened, and the way he made me feel that had won my heart. My heart, the one I'd taken back from Teddie. Sensing me standing there, he opened his eyes. His smile warmed me to the core, banishing my murderous evening. Holding his arms wide, he welcomed me into an embrace. Tucking my face into the crook of his neck, I let him hold me. And I knew I could get through anything if he, was waiting for me at the end of it all. "You are okay?" he whispered, his breath warm against my cheek. I tried not to think about Miss Minnie, the look in her eyes, imploring, scared. Even though I'd washed off her blood, I could still feel the warmth, the vitality, her essence, as it leaked out of her. I could feel her fear, her fight. I shivered. "What's the matter?" Jean-Charles sensed my discomfort. I pulled him over to the couch, then curled under his arm, tucking my feet up under me after I'd shucked my shoes. And I told him. The song started over twice before I had finished. Jean-Charles hadn't said a word. He'd simply held me tight and let me talk. When I'd finished, he kissed my forehead. "You are going to Macau." It wasn't a question. He knew I had no choice. Well, I guess we all have a choice, but letting Irv Giddings get away was not one of them. But we both knew that wasn't exactly why I was going. Teddie. I'm not sure I could find the words to describe all that Teddie had been and continued to be to me. Best friends, my first love, my biggest disappointment, and now, back to best friends, even though it still rankled that he looked better in my clothes than I did. Teddie had been Vegas's foremost female impersonator. I'd even let him wear my vintage Chanel and my Manolos, even though he stretched them out. If that's not love, I don't know what is. Was. The break in my heart still hurt when I thought of him. Unfortunately, our relationship had been a bit one-sided. Teddie had fallen more in love with himself than with me. In the race of love, a distant second wasn't what I was hoping for. Wasn't what I needed. Teddie left. I'd let him go. Then he came back. A ruse created by my parents, but I couldn't exactly prove it. That's where things had gone from bad to abysmal. Teddie had fled house arrest for a murder he didn't commit. Somewhere in that pea-sized brain of his, he thought it would be a good idea to go off half-cocked to Macau to bring Irv Giddings to justice, and, according to Mona, me back to his bed. So not happening. But regardless, somehow it was my fault, in a roundabout sort of way. I hadn't handled Teddie's return very well. My friends and family argued with my assessment, but my fault or not, I felt responsible, and the only way to live with it was to make it go away. And somehow, someway, I needed to put my feelings for Teddie to bed. Okay, A bad analogy. But I needed to get him out of my head and my heart. Time to move on. But I couldn't let him die for me. A martyred love, just what I needed. Of course, it wasn't all about me, but right now I was feeling a bit put upon. A fly the spider had singled out for dinner. So yes, for a myriad of reasons, I had to go to Macau. Teddie was ill-equipped to deal with Irv Giddings, and the Chos, and the God-know-who-elses of the Chinese underworld. Unlike Teddie, I had a lifetime of dealing with lowlifes, so the job fell to me. There was that irony again. While Jean-Charles wasn't pleased, to put a nice spin on it, he was trying to be supportive. "En cielo?" he asked, still holding me, still loving me, but a slight mock in his voice, as if choosing Teddie over a hotel was an incomprehensible choice. To be honest, I agreed with him. Cielo, my very own hotel. The grand opening loomed. New Year's Eve. My birthday. And I had to go to Macau. I couldn't even begin to process how stupid an idea that was, so I didn't. Maybe, just maybe, the police would do their job and I wouldn't have to go. Right. And maybe Irv Giddings would turn himself in, the Chinese would stop trying to game the system, and Teddie would be alive. Teddie. Our first loves ever forgotten. I pulled Jean-Charles's other arm around me. Everything is in place. I'll have my phone. And maybe you will help me stay on top of things? Of course. However, it is not ideal. But it is inevitable. He kissed my forehead. I do love that about you. Always riding to the rescue. Tilting at windmills that had developed a habit of shooting back, that's my gig. I lifted my face to his for a long, sweet kiss. Macau will be dangerous, Jean-Charles said after I released him, his accent making the whole thing sound somehow wonderfully delicious and exciting. No more than here. In the last couple of days, I'd been shot at more times than I could count. Frankly, it was getting old. Maybe a change of scenery would change my luck. Yeah, even I didn't believe that. I cannot argue with that. He toyed with the large diamond on my left ring finger. You owe it to me to come back. I know. Desperate to change the subject before we ruined Christmas, I placed my hand on his stomach, skin to skin. I gasped at the sizzle, the electric connection that arced through me. It happened each time we touched, but still surprised me. Jean-Charles pulled in a deep breath through his nose. He felt it too. I let my hand wander. I haven't had my Christmas yet. He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. And what did you ask for? A handsome Frenchman wearing very little. Then you must have been a good girl. He pulled my shirt free and worked a hand under it. Cupping my breast, his thumb teased the nipple to a peek through the thin fabric of my bra. I am always good, I said in my most suggestive voice. Somehow I didn't laugh. But I'm feeling naughty. I worked my hand down to test just how engaged my Frenchman was. An embarrassing lack of control, even for me. Could I plead unfulfilled homicidal tendencies? All that unused adrenaline? That and the fact that I was head over heels all contributed to my taking what I needed. My Frenchman had already risen to the occasion. He stood, then pulled me to my feet. Wrapping my arms around his neck, I captured his mouth as I pressed myself against him. His tongue tangled with mine. He groaned when I deepened the kiss. The bedroom? He managed. The kids? I figured he had that well in hand, but it never hurt to ask. Jean-Charles had a 5-year-old son, Christophe, a head full of blonde curls, a smile to match his father's, and eyes a deeper blue. The boy, taking a lead from his father, had wormed his way into my heart before I'd known what was happening. Jean-Charles's niece, Chantal, a culinary student intent on following her uncle into the business, was also bunking at her uncle's place. 2 kids, 2 of us. We were horribly outnumbered. They are asleep. Jean-Charles sounded less than certain. Here? Yes. He broke away for a moment and closed the double doors as I shucked my shoes. Kids, he added, tossing the word like water onto a fire. Nothing like children to kill the sexual mojo. Always plotting, I said, completing his thought in the same way he completed me. Sex with kids in the house was a bit different than my usual pick a partner and a piece of furniture and have at it. I'd learned this lesson the hard way. Jean-Charles and I had about herniated ourselves in the bathroom, doors locked, the theme song to Thomas the Tank Engine at a decibel level suitable for torture. Mind-blowing sex. But that song now conjured physical reactions I didn't think the creators intended. The bar, with its windows and louvered doors, presented a new challenge. As I shucked my clothes, I lowered the blinds and secured the doors. Ever the Frenchman, Jean-Charles lingered over the perfect wine. If he thought we were easing into this over a perfectly chilled Sancerre, he had another thing coming. "For later," he said with a smile, as if he could read my thoughts. He probably could, which should have terrified me. My brain is hallowed ground, sacred in its weird rituals. But I guess he truly was the one, because I no longer cared if he saw behind the curtain. As I stepped out of my slacks in the middle of the room, Jean-Charles paused, his eyes alight. Then he thrust the bottle into a bucket of ice and moved around the bar. He stopped me as I hooked a finger through the fine lace that Mona assured me passed for functional underwear. To me, the stuff gave me a perpetual wedgie, but the effect it had on my Frenchman made me willing to suffer through. "My turn," he whispered, his breath warm against my cheek. Deliberately slowing the pace, he reached behind me and undid my bra with a simple flick that always left me in awe. I'd been fastening and unfastening bras far longer than he had, but perhaps not as often as he did, and I couldn't do it with such skill. I'd love to know his trick, but even I knew some things are best left to lie. I let him slow it down. History had taught me that slow was definitely better, especially with Jean-Charles. He delighted in each nuance. I was good with that, as long as he stroked all the right buttons. As it turned out, all that slow and sensuous was way out of reach for both of us. Fear prodding us, love entangling us, we tore at each other with an intense need for connection in the face of a long goodbye. Goodbye sex is like makeup sex, but with desperation replacing the languid surety of a bit more time. The tingle of sex still sizzling through me like a shorted wire brought me slowly to consciousness. Enjoying the memory, savoring the heat from my Frenchman wrapped around me on the couch, I lingered in the half-awake state until I realized the sizzle, which was really a vibration, came from my phone. Irritation dampened the afterglow, and life came back into focus. Reality, such a downer, at least parts of it. Worn out, a bit defeated, deflated at the thought of heading across the Pacific to face God knew what, and totally unwilling to disturb Jean-Charles, I let the call roll to voicemail. For a moment, peace reigned, then the damned thing vibrated anew. "Perhaps it is important." Jean-Charles's voice was husky with sleep. Awake, he decided to nibble on my shoulder, which made it damned hard to not call his bluff. Everyone who calls me thinks it's important. I rarely agree. I wormed my arm around, my hands searching for the vibration. "Stop that," I said, pleasure and a giggle infusing each word, which sort of defeated the purpose. He switched to my ear, making me shudder deliciously. "That's not what I meant." Despite my best intentions to be dour, I giggled. "What time is it?" I asked, trying to get a foothold in the day. Jean-Charles found the phone under his left thigh, which rested on my right one. I didn't want to think about how it got there, or if I had inadvertently butt-dialed someone in the past few hours, giving a whole new meaning to the term phone sex. Used to humiliation, I didn't worry about it too much. Except for the host of media types on speed dial. Reading about my tryst in Norm Clark's column, or his replacements, I still couldn't believe he'd retired, in the RJ tomorrow, later today, would not add to my Christmas cheer, even lacking as it was. "Still early," Jean-Charles said between nibbles. So helpful. I glanced at the caller ID. The big boss, Albert Rothstein to the masses, father to me, was the god of the Babylon properties, and as such, mentioning his name usually prompted a genuflection or some other sign of supplication. Not from me, of course. I knew his secrets, one of which was that he was human, and right now, more human than I could handle. Still, he was one of the few people who centered my world. As I swiped my finger across the face of the phone, all vestiges of warmth, sleep, happiness, and hopes for a normal life evaporated. "Is everything okay?" I was proud I hadn't shouted.
Lucky.
He sighed.
I heard what happened at Minnie's. When you didn't call.
With a sinking heart, I realized I'd added to his worries. He'd already been shot. He didn't need another load from me. "I'm so sorry, Father. I only got home a couple of hours ago. Calling you in the middle of the night didn't seem like a good idea." Of course, I hadn't thought of calling him, which added a huge line item to my guilt list. This whole family thing was pretty new, and it still surprised me that there were people who worried about me. Until recently, Mona and the big boss had kept his paternity secret. It was complicated, but I understood. Apparently, even in Vegas and even 30 years ago, it was a felony to have sex with a minor. Mona had lied about her age, but that didn't change the facts. She was pregnant with me. So, instead of ruining the big boss's career, they'd lied. But now they'd come clean, and my family had doubled in size, and my father was a worrier. My mother, not so much. Mona had always been there for me, but she slept until noon and wouldn't even consider worrying until fully caffeinated and the police had issued a nationwide APB. Awakening her usually resulted in an evisceration. To shift from fiercely independent to interconnected at my age was asking a lot. "How did you hear about Minnie?" I asked my father.
I know people.
That line was a joke between us, considering the big boss had come up through the ranks of the mobbed-up Vegas. But now it didn't sound so funny.
We need to talk.
His voice held the nobody fucks with my family tone. Jean-Charles started to move off of me. "No." I pulled him back down.
No?
My father didn't sound pleased. He wasn't used to having that tone ignored. "I wasn't talking to you."
Oh.
Now he sounded confused and perhaps chagrined, as the light must have dawned. Used to having me at his beck and call, the big boss was still transitioning to the concept of my having a life, a real life, outside of the Babylon. Of course, we both knew that was a clever bit of fiction, but we'd been keeping up the farce. Jean-Charles caught my lips in a sensuous kiss. I focused all my attention, savoring, making a memory.
Lucky?
The demanding voice of my father in my ear. Slowly, reluctantly, I relinquished Jean-Charles's lips. "I'm here," I answered my father as I shifted into good daughter mode. "Are you okay? Mother? The twins who have yet to be named?" Yes, despite my advanced age of 30-ish, my parents had just given birth to twins. Of course, my mother had been 15 when she had me, but still. She'd been a hooker after all. You'd think she would have learned something. My thoughts took a hard left. My father had been awfully happy lately. Still squeamish about my parents' sex life, I shuddered, then wrestled my thinking back on track. Good at procreation, bad at protection. Mona still couldn't settle on names. I wondered what that was about.
We're all fine. But
He hesitated, which made my heart skip a beat. I waited, then felt compelled by worry to jump into the silence. "You know I hate butts." My father was more the bull in the china shop than a beat-around-the-bush type. Still, he hesitated as my blood pressure spiked.
we need to talk. There are some things you need to know.
Ah, the payoff for all that worry. There really was something to worry about. The big boss wasn't good at hiding things either. Okay. When?
On your way to the airport. They are readying the Gulf Stream.
Now? I clutched my Frenchman to me.
It's important.
2 simple words, yet they lodged like bullets in my brain. Did you send someone to pack for me too? Being railroaded was a sure way to piss me off. My father knew that. He did it anyway. I didn't like what that implied.
Lucky.
Now a tone of exaggerated patience that wheezed into imploring. So not like the big boss. He never implored anyone other than the Virgin Mary, which was sort of funny, all things considered. Rothstein wasn't a Catholic name, but we each are entitled to our own beliefs and superstitions. Where exactly am I going? I must have still sounded pissed. When he answered with a,
"Lucky, please,"
he sounded tired. No, more than that. Defeated. Oh, this was so not good. Chapter 3. Daylight was still a pale harbinger of the brightness to come, brushing the eastern sky with color. Like a string of pearls, the lights from the long queue of arriving planes draped against the pinks and oranges. The tourists came from everywhere, all looking for something. A constantly changing kaleidoscope of cultures, genders, races, sexual orientations. We had them all, and we made magic. Vegas. In contrast to the streets barely beginning to fill, the Babylon was already firing at full bore. When I pushed through the heavy glass door, noise and energy buffeted me. Normally, I would have found joy in that, but not today. Well, okay, I lied. I always found joy in that, even today as I staggered under the weight of the proverbial other shoe. I'd lingered in Jean-Charles's arms, then taken a moment to go upstairs and kiss Christophe. I hadn't meant to awaken him. He'd looped his arms around my neck, holding me tight, as if somehow he'd known I was going far away.
"You must be back for your birthday,"
he'd whispered in his lilting French accent.
"I have a very good present, but Papa made me promise not to tell."
He smelled of baby soap and mischief. I will. New Year's Eve. 6 days to travel halfway around the planet to save the world as I knew it. Piece of cake.
"Promise?"
he whispered. There was that word. I took a deep breath. Squeezing my eyes shut, I took the leap. I promise.
"Want to know what I got you?"
Still clutching me tight, he held me with those big blue eyes. I brushed a curl back from his forehead. Holding a little person was so visceral, bringing peace and contentment, like a puppy, but way better. My reaction had been unexpected. "No, I love surprises," I lied. The top 3 things I hated were meanness, untruthfulness, and surprises. And cockroaches. But, well, they weren't really important now. He smiled as sleep tugged at his lids.
"No, you don't like surprises."
Christophe sounded as if that was a crime against nature. He was probably right.
"Papa told me."
He was accurate, but not clear. Bad surprises I don't like, but presents from boys I love, I like those kinds of surprises. With the hint of a smile teasing his lips, his eyelids had closed, and he'd drifted off. And I'd left. No lingering, no long goodbyes. Almost running for the door, I'd taken a passionate kiss from Jean-Charles, then jumped in the car and left all that happiness in my rear view as fast as possible. A moment longer in that house, in Jean-Charles's arms, and I wouldn't have been able to break myself away. I had no choice. Not really. Not if I was to live with myself. And if I didn't keep my promise to that little boy, I couldn't live with myself either. So I had to go, and in doing so, I risked never coming back and breaking a little boy's heart. He'd already lost his mother. How did normal people shoulder all of these emotional burdens? Whether I stayed, or went, or never returned, had never mattered much before. Now it meant the world. Hamstrung by my choices, immobilized by emotional responsibility, I paused for a moment in the doorway to the Babylon, absorbing the energy, the happiness. Behind me, the valet eased the Ferrari from the curb, its 500 horses at a low growl. Irv Giddings had blown up my Porsche, and darn near with me in it. The death of a vintage 911, another in the long list of insults and indignities I'd suffered at the hands of that man. My mechanic had wept when I'd told him. Of course, my temperamental car and I had put 3 of his daughters through college, but I think he really loved that car. All I had left of it was the emblem from the center of the steering wheel, a sacrilege and a loss I was still processing. Giddings had torched my apartment too, and if I hadn't been up in Teddie's place right above mine when the bomb went off, everything I used to be had vanished in a few moments of white-hot heat. All the magazines touted the magic of personal reinvention. Personally, I thought they were full of it. I liked the me I used to be. but I would never be that me again. The guys at our in-house Ferrari dealership had let me drive one of their loaner cars while I tried to make an impossible choice. Italian or German? I had yet to commit, which didn't surprise anyone who knew me well. When I dropped my suitcase at his feet, the bellman nodded and smiled. "Give me an hour, maybe not even that long."
"I'll keep it right here, Miss O'Toole."
A 20 made his smile even wider. "Could you also please have Paolo waiting? I need to go to the airport." As I said it, the trip became real. Most people would jump at a trip to Macau. Sometimes being me wasn't all I'd hoped it to be. I wondered if everybody felt the same way at one time or another. I suspected they did, but that didn't make me feel any better. Turning back to the lobby, I stopped and drank it in. The huge room of white Italian marble, inlaid with bright mosaics, topped by a soaring ceiling covered with Chihuly glass. Hummingbirds and butterflies arcing in flight always settled me. The beating heart of the Babylon, a first impression, if you will, and as such, hugely important and a priority of mine. My staff would gladly attest to that, generally with an exaggerated eye roll. The nighttime playlist filtered through the speakers: Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis, other crooners, an homage to the Rat Pack era which birthed the modern Vegas. That was my favorite era in Vegas. I had lived it vicariously through Mona's and the Big Boss's stories, which probably obscured the truth under rosy-tinted half-truths. History is always better in the remembering. To the left, reception desks marched down the wall under bright tents of cloth. At this time of the morning, the lines were short or non-existent. Only 2 cocktail servers worked the lines, offering flutes of free champagne. Give it an hour or two, and the lines would swell, requiring an army of beverage servers wielding full trays. To my right, across the lobby from reception, floor-to-ceiling lucite windows separated the lobby from an indoor ski slope, replete with rope tow and man-made snow. The grooming crew readied the hill for another day of skiing in the Mojave, an affront to Mother Nature that attracted young and old. Occasional shouts emanated from the far recesses in front of me. The casino lay just beyond the lobby and was separated by our own version of the Euphrates, a meandering stream bounded by reeds and grasses, and populated by far too many ill-tempered waterfowl that had apparently studied the rabbit's method of procreation. The vet on staff earned her keep. Bridges arced over the stream, providing access to the casino and the opportunity for great photo ops. To my immediate left, before reception, the opening to the bazaar beckoned. A trail of high-end shops with wares worthy of the most extravagant sultan. The bazaar also held our wedding chapel, the Temple of Love. Frankly, I thought we could have done better with the name. Something like the Hitch and Git, or the Ball and Chain, or maybe even the Life Sentence appealed to me, but the big boss hadn't seen it my way. Never having taken the plunge, I didn't argue. Also in the bazaar was Samson's, a ziggurat of beauty and pampering with scantily clad young men, each a personification of the namesake, ready and willing to do a woman's bidding. My kind of place. I'd been rescued from peroxide in that place. Another new me thing. Teddie had helped with that. Teddie. We'd been best friends. That was the part I missed the most. The Babylon even had its own version of the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Ours were the only tropical climate in the middle of a desert. At least, that's how the marketing department described it. And I was willing to buy into the web they wove. Thankfully, the web worked, and the Babylon captured more than its share of the 45 million visitors drinking, partying, and gambling throughout our fair city. All of these parts together were my home, my Shangri-La, brought to life by the people who gave it heart. If I left for very long, I had no doubt I would cease to exist. Leave it to me to have a symbiotic relationship with a place. Okay, not only a place, but Vegas. A smarter woman would have picked San Francisco, or Paris, or Rome even, despite the Italian's penchant for ignoring the necessities of life, like fiber optic cable, high-speed internet access, and some semblance of a work week. Briefly, I considered swinging by my office on the mezzanine, then even more quickly abandoned the idea. Miss P, my right-hand man, was on her honeymoon with the beautiful Jeremy Whitlock, Vegas's preeminent private investigator. Brandy, Miss P's assistant, was in charge, and she had Detective Romeo to fall back on, which didn't exactly give me warm fuzzies, but, well, birth by fire and all of that. I just hoped no one burned down the Babylon while I was gone. Yes, I have an exaggerated sense of self-importance, one of my many coping mechanisms, along with sarcasm, self-delusion, and a penchant for bad cliches. But, as customer relations people, our job was to keep the cops away, and the hotel off the nightly news, or the front page of the local rag, the Review-Journal. Brandy was young, but she was good, and Jerry, our head of security, had her back. Even more telling and slightly alarming, especially to me and my huge need to be needed, nobody had called me. I'm a pleaser. As part of my Lucky O'Toole self-improvement plan, I was working on that, but the work was tedious and slow, and I lost interest fairly regularly. I checked my phone. Yep, no missed phone calls. That was sort of odd, but I tried not to let it worry me. Maybe just this once, Santa would lighten my load for a bit. Yeah, right. The big boss's apartment sat atop the west tower of the hotel, a commanding view from the 52nd floor. My keycard gave me access to the private floor and started the elevator on its ride to the top. Leaning against the back wall, I stared at my reflection in the polished metal of the doors. Sad to say, I looked as tired as I felt, although just a hint of very satisfying sex softened the sharpness of worry that widened my eyes and etched lines that bracketed my mouth. My hair, back to a soft brown from its original bottle blonde, just touched my shoulders. A fringe of bangs brushed my eyes. My hips were a little wider than the standard American emaciated look so popular with the younger crowd, my tummy a little softer. But, as Mona said, I should be thankful for my height, which helped camouflage most of my imperfections. All in all, I guess I looked like an older version of the me I used to be. Whether I was wiser was still a topic for debate. As the elevator whooshed to an easy stop, I pushed myself off the wall and straightened my sweater. My clothes were all new. My collection of vintage couture, collected over a lifetime, had vanished in a cloud of thick smoke when Giddings bombed my apartment. Effectively, he'd wiped out the physical talismans to who I was, and in doing so, inflicted the worst kind of pain. He was good at that. At the time, I got out with the clothes on my back and my bird, Newton, a foul-mouthed macaw who had, despite my best intentions, chosen me as his human. To be honest, I would have chosen a few other things before the bird, but the bird was what I got. I still wasn't sure what message the universe was sending me through that little bit of serendipity. Now wearing non-vintage felt odd, as if I wore someone else's skin. I was me, and yet I wasn't, which was unnerving but liberating. I ran my fingers through my hair, which seemed determined to hang limp and lifeless. This Pavlovian need to arrange myself well for presentation to my boss was an ingrained habit from years ago. I was 15, an eager employee, and for all I knew, the big boss was simply that, my boss. I should be mad at my parents for denying me the stability of family, but I didn't have it in me. And I wasn't sure ours would ever have been considered stable, or even functional. Family. Folks who you forgive when you would shoot anyone else for the same transgressions. The Babylon had saved me, molded me, until I was as much a part of it as the stucco and stone. As I stepped into my father's, and now my mother's, main living area, I started running my mouth. Even though my father was just home from the hospital, offense was still the best defense. You do know I have a hotel of my own opening in 5 days. You do know that, right? I raised my voice to carry through the room. I've got no business running halfway around the world chasing one idiot, 2 fools, and a girl who would be wise to steer clear of me. The light in the large room came from the low glow of dimmed spots trained on the various works of lesser masters that dotted the upholstered leather walls, and the kaleidoscope of neon flashing through the wall of windows at the far end that painted the walls with its dizzying display. That view of the Strip mesmerized, drawing everyone who entered the room like moths to a flame. I was no exception. Mona had rearranged the furniture. Couches and chairs made from hides of various former animals and exotic woods. Personally, I didn't like the whole skins of dead animals thing, but I still wore leather shoes and ate meat, so making a distinction seemed a bit hypocritical. My father hadn't answered, but I knew where to find him. The couch in front of that window, looking at Vegas preening, even as the dawn muted its vibrancy. On my way, I stopped at the bar to add a splash of Chambord to a flute of champagne that waited for me. A Kir Royale cured most of the world's ills. Well, champagne in general was a universal panacea. Most days I drank too much, to the point of worrying about it. I used to be a Wild Turkey 101 gal, but I'd switched to bubbles and felt virtuous in that bit of self-delusion. Quite simply, life was better with bubbles. Unlike Hemingway, I didn't drink to make people more interesting. I drank to make them less terrifying, or perhaps to cast a rose-colored hue on the starkness of a sometimes harsh reality. Not good. A line item in the syllabus of my self-improvement plan. Hadn't gotten that far. I plopped down next to my father, who acknowledged me with a pat on my knee. "Where are your keepers?" I asked, surprised to see not one nubile young thing in attendance. Of course, Mona had a chilling effect on the amount of pulchritude orbiting my father, so the lack of youngsters in attendance was not surprising. However, finding him alone was. "They made me promise you would keep nurses around the clock for a few days. That's how we sprung you from the hospital. The surgeon, I forget his name, he was apoplectic. Made me swear on all my future children."
Pretty safe bet,
my father groused, ignoring my irritation. "You don't need me to procreate to leave your legacy. You're doing just fine adding to the family line as it is. You sent the nurses away, didn't you?"
I have your mother.
"To take care of you?" I'm not even going to dignify that bit of ridiculousness with an argument. "But you also have the nannies, which seems appropriate." He gave me a huff, which served as a slight chuckle. Pale, thinner than normal, his face showing his struggle. My father shifted as if rearranging the pain. He gave me a wan version of his victory grin. To the casual observer, he looked like himself. His chin still stuck out, as if begging to be hit. As usual, his salt and pepper hair was cut short and styled. A power cut, he called it. Whatever it was, it suited him. His face was clean-shaven, a nick on his chin dotted with dried blood, his cheekbones sharp enough to have been carved of granite. Today they accentuated the hollowness of his cheeks. His shoulders broad, his arms thick. He cut an imposing figure despite his short stature. Even today, just barely back from the brink. Today, as every other, his shirt was starched, his slacks were creased, his feet bare inside a polished pair of Ferragamo loafers. His open collar was the only nod to the earliness of the hour and the fragility of his health. The tape of his bandage barely visible in the V of his collar was a stark reminder of how close death had lingered. Still, he wouldn't look at me. "Any news on Minnie?" I asked.
Holding her own. Millimeters, they said.
Millimeters. That's what the doctors had said about him. A fine line between life and death. He shot me a quick glance, but wouldn't meet my eyes.
Please don't tell me that as you get older, you're going to turn into one of those pundits, always spewing profundities they'd overheard or read somewhere.
"What do you mean, turn into?" I tried for indignation. I thought I achieved it. "I'm there, and I own it." Always good for a laugh. This time I only scored a tight smile from the big boss. Whatever I'd been summoned to hear, it was weighing heavily on him. He tried for a positive spin.
It's actually good timing that you're going to Macau now.
Good timing? My voice rose on a wave of anger. "I'm opening a hotel in less than a week."
Yes, of course.
He let the silence stretch uncomfortably between us. He knew I could rarely resist jumping into the abyss. I fought a losing battle with myself, which seemed an impossibility. If I won, how could I lose? But the losing me didn't disappoint my father. "Okay, what makes you think the timing is good?"
The priceless watch exhibit opens tomorrow.
I knew that, but it had fallen way down on my priority list. An exhibit of amazing timepieces, each of them valued at over $5 million each, with the top one, An extremely rare Patek Philippe, worth at least 4 times that. The Chinese, caught up in Western commercialism, loved collectibles. The rarer, the better. Showing one's success in a somewhat understated way was a favorite pastime the Chinese elevated to great sport. And timepieces were perfect. Only those in the know would be impressed.
It'll be good that a representative of the hotel is there.
I angled my body so I could look at him squarely from the side. I don't think I'll have much time to glad hand. He pinched the bridge of his nose.
Yes, of course.
What part of all of this was he pretending didn't exist? And why?
Sometimes it's best to let things go,
he said, apropos of nothing. Finally, he turned and looked at me.
Let Cho go.
No. I put my hand on his arm. Cho's got you in a headlock. You can't keep that kind of secret from me. I can read you like a book. Okay, not that well, but I had a pretty good beat on him. I need to know exactly what he has on you. I'm a Rothstein. And? I raised an eyebrow, urging him to finish the unofficial family motto.
No one fucks with my family.
He still didn't look convinced.
You could get killed.
Anytime, anywhere. I decided to lighten the tone while he mulled over the options he thought he had. In reality, he only had one, to tell me, but pushing would only be met with stonewalling. My mother's breast pumps sat on the side table. Diapers, thankfully clean, were stuffed in the crevices of the couch. I leaned to the side, raising one cheek, then reached under and pulled out a plastic rattle, which I put next to the pump. I love what Mother's done to the place. That got the crack of a smile from my father, still avoiding my gaze as he sipped amber liquid from a cut crystal Steuben tumbler. Is that the 15 or the 25? He hand-jerked, rattling the lone ice cube.
The 25.
Oh, so not good. He only broke out the expensive stuff when faced with matters of life and death. I braced for what was coming, whatever it was, and for a moment, I was a little girl wishing I was anywhere else but here. Before he had a chance to tell me what exactly threatened life as I knew it, my mother shuffled from the hallway leading from the private areas. Oh, Lucky, I'm so glad you're here. Her tone didn't match her words. Glad didn't exactly ring true. I didn't take it personally. With Mona, it rarely was. Merry Christmas, Mother. I rose and gave her a hug, then returned to my spot next to my father. I didn't let her greeting get me all excited. When it came to me, my mother was an emotional porcupine. Best not to let my guard down. Her perfect face and flawless skin crumpled into a frown. Christmas? She pretended to be confused, a ruse men found absolutely fascinating, much to my consternation. Is it really Christmas? A new sparkler on a gold chain flashed at her neckline. She knew full well it was Christmas. She pushed at her disheveled hair, as if embarrassed by her unpulled-together state. In fact, by Mona's standards, she had let herself go. Still whippet thin and maintained to within pinching an inch of perfection, she looked like my younger sister. Even messy, she inspired envy and insecurity. Wisps of brown hair curled next to her face as she cocked her head to one side and she gave me the once-over. Is that a new outfit? Of course. She looked at me as if she'd forgotten that her firstborn, her only born until a short time ago, had nearly been immolated. Have you gained weight? She asked. Mona, both a boon and the bane of my existence. At least she was consistent. Another sip of champagne helped me absorb the blow. Mother, have you forgotten? We have a holiday moratorium on insults. She loved me. I knew that. After all, I was always the one she called when she'd gotten her ass in a crack, which happened with alarming regularity. Giving me an opportunity to save her was an expression of love in my mother's convoluted way of thinking. Frankly, I could do with a little less motherly love. The truth can't be an insult, Mona said with surety as she waded into quicksand. I'd discovered that, with my mother, the more confident she sounded, the less sure she really was. Dazzle them with bullshit would be a fitting epitaph. From where I'm sitting, it sure sounds like one. I sipped my drink and drank in the strip. I believe you're mixing legal theories with reality. Truth is an absolute defense should someone decide to sue you for libel or slander. But truth is not a defense to intentional infliction of emotional distress. My father raised an eyebrow. I was shoveling as fast as I could. My job puts me in contact with far too many lawyers. They breed like rabbits, and they all have a beef with me. Sorta like Mother. Mona blinked several times, obviously trying to figure out a counter. There's a moratorium? A dodge rather than a counter. So like her. I wasn't insulting you. I just asked a simple question. She mustered the energy for a moment of indignation, then gave it up. I'm not in the mood to parse words with you, Mother. I didn't need Mona right now. Not with her perfect ass, her perfect ankles, her perfect nose, and her perfect ability to punch every button I had by simply walking into the room. Mothers and daughters. And now she had 2 more. I took special delight in that. Go back to sleep. We can cross swords again later today, I offered with the illusion of fair play. Funny how promises could sound exactly like lies. I'd be half a world away by the time she'd regained her strength. Oh, lucky. I'm so tired. She motioned me to move over so she could squeeze in next to me on the couch. It was a tight fit. See, if you just maybe try that cleanse that all my friends swear by. She wasn't giving it up, even in the afterglow of Christmas. Mother, water, lemon juice, maple syrup, and cayenne would not ever constitute a meal. An alternative to waterboarding, maybe. But a meal? Never. I felt my father's shoulders start to shake, but he kept his expression impassive, his eyes straight ahead. Mona looked at me with a clear lack of understanding. Well, I still can't fathom how you can eat bread. She made it sound like a mortal sin or something. It's okay. I say 3 Hail Marys and 1 Our Father, and all is forgiven. Turning my attention to the light show outside, I retreated from the fray. She put a dainty hand on my knee and went all sanctimonious. It's okay. I accept you for who and what you are. I narrowed my eyes. If that were true, then you wouldn't keep pointing out how I can improve. But then I wouldn't be your mother. Truer words were never spoken. She seemed pleased. She didn't get it. Mona adjusted her robe, arranging the folds to cover her legs. I've been meaning to talk to you about something. A flank attack, and just when I'd been feeling so smug. I braced myself for impact. Great timing, since you've softened me up by being so nice and all. She ducked, letting that salvo sail right by. With you leaving town this week, someone needs to be managing the last-minute preparations at Cielo. Panic gripped my heart and squeezed. Oh, no. Oh, no, no, no. I shook my head and gripped my father's knee. Mother, a lot of someones are doing just that. I tried to shut her down with a cold tone. It never worked, but I had to try. Well, I know. She pouted. I didn't even have to look. I could hear it in her voice. Besides, this was a classic Mona gambit. Mother, you are not to do anything at Cielo. I turned to face her so she could get the full force of my sentiment. Nothing. Not one thing. Aren't you being a little harsh? She used her tiny voice now. Against all I knew to be sacred, I weakened. Mother, please. I know you're trying to help, but I've got this. Everything is in place. My team is well trained. My staff knows what to do. Besides, Jean-Charles will be at the restaurant, and I'll be in constant contact. The forlorn look on her face made me feel bad. Being trapped all day with 2 tiny babies had to be one of Dante's circles of hell. I didn't know which one, but probably the closest to the pit of despair, if he had one of those. Or was that the Princess Bride? Teddie and I used to have movie nights. He brought the popcorn. Mother and I were at an impasse when I was saved by a whale. One baby, either Thing 1 or Thing 2, as I dubbed them, let loose a piercing shriek, followed closely behind by her sibling. If Mona didn't name them soon, the Thing names would stick, which would be karmic justice, all things considered, although the girls would pay the price, which wouldn't be fair. Having Mona as a mother was burden enough. She cast a weary look at me, then an imploring one at her husband.
I need to speak with Lucky,
the big boss said in his kindest voice that rode on an "I'm sorry." He reached across me and squeezed her hand.
Then I'll come help. We won't be long.
You two always have something to talk about. Can't I help? The babies wailed in stereo. Mona shot a worried glance in the general direction of the cries. Even I had to admit there was a primal reaction to a baby's cry.
Perhaps now is not the best time,
my father said, kindness and love infusing his voice with warmth. Maybe not. Mona rose. She paused, wringing her hands, caught between two worlds. But you'll let me help sometime? Neither my father nor I had an answer to that. She seemed to accept that, which made me sad. Mona would have to find her own spot. I had, my father had, and she had too, but she'd given that up for him. Would she think the price worth it? Women were expected to do so much, give so much, while men were praised to the moon for changing one diaper. We both watched Mona shuffle back the way she'd come, disappearing into the hallway tunnel. I want to tell her she had it coming, but she looked so pathetic I can't even muster one good gloat.
She's so cute.
My father sounded like a lovesick teenager. Cute wasn't the adjective I was searching for. I squeezed my father's leg, hard. You can't let her do anything at Cielo. He shrugged.
You know your mother.
I do. That's why you have to promise you'll keep her away.
I'll do my best.
That meant he might try, but if she was determined, he wasn't going to throw himself in front of the Mona bus. Coward. He didn't disagree. Evidence of the true depths of his cuckoldry. The wails diminished, and after a few minutes, silence once again reigned. To be honest, looking at my father's face, his hard eyes, his clenched jaw, I figured I might have a better chance of survival with the twins. Knowing that my father would get to his point, his way, and in his own time, I sipped my dainty drink and hoped life wasn't about to implode.
I know the timing on this whole thing is bad,
he started, his voice lacking its normal force. Understatement. Sorry that I hadn't opted for something higher octane. I took another slug of my Kier, but couldn't find the anesthetizing warmth.
Unavoidable.
He shot a glance at me as he threw back the last of his drink, then put the empty glass on the floor by his feet. Then he pulled his wallet from his back pocket, extracting a $100 bill. By rote, he started working the paper, folding, creasing, unfolding, ingrained steps that would turn the bill into a tiny piece of origami art.
It's worse than you know.
From the first 3 folds, I knew this one would be a crane, the Chinese symbol for peace and longevity. I waited, and I knew that moment of terror experienced by jumpers once they'd left the bridge, but before they hit the water.
You read our financials, right?
My father started again, his focus on the small figure taking shape in his hands. I helped the auditors prepare them. I softened my voice. He'd been through so much, fought so hard, built so much, not only for himself, but for all of us and our several thousand employees. The years, the battles, had to have taken a toll. Not to mention Sam Cho's bullet. He pulled in a deep breath, wincing against the pain.
Right. Then you know in recent years our Macau operation has been more important to our bottom line, to our financial health, than our Vegas properties.
It was no secret the economics of Vegas were changing, gaming revenues diminishing, and club and entertainment revenues gaining, but falling short of covering the shortfall. Of course.
The Chinese government is cracking down on money laundering in Macau. Most of the diplomats are on the take, but the government won't do anything about that.
I finished the story. The bribes flow out of China into Macau, are laundered through the casinos, then invested overseas.
Yes. Hard to prove, hard to track, but we have a big problem. The launderers have been working our property pretty hard. If some of the activity comes to light, we could lose our gaming concession. It's hard enough to get the allocation of tables promised. The government has most of us over the barrel.
My brain ticked into corporate mode, strategizing a solution to the problem. Okay, I can work on that. I'd always worried about doing business, investing as much as we had, in a place where the law was malleable and readily bent to suit the local government's whim. I hated betting on the largesse of a bunch of officials, some of whom were corrupt, some not, but impossible to distinguish. So few understood that we'd had to invest hundreds of millions, paying folks off at every step of the construction process, with no guarantee of even getting a gaming concession, much less an allotment of tables that would give the property a chance of paying off the construction loans. High-stakes gambling at its most elemental. Yes, the potential profits were huge, but with the odds stacked against the foreign players.
There's very little time.
My father's fingers worked the delicate folds.
If you don't figure out what is happening in Macau.
He stopped, shaking his head as he focused on his small work of art taking shape. With a hand on his shoulder, I made him look at me. How bad is it? I need to know the truth. He didn't answer until he'd finished the crane. Taking my hand in his, he pressed it into my palm, closing my fingers over it.
Cho came here to tell me he had me over a barrel. I think he wanted me out of the way, thinking you would be easier to deal with.
He smiled at that idea as he touched his chest where the bullet had managed to miss everything vital.
He was so wrong.
I wasn't so sure. My father pretty much had a lock on strong-arming. Dad, I leveled my sternest gaze, a parent quizzing a child. How bad? The first time I'd called him Dad, I saw the softening in his eyes as he met my gaze. Sadness lurked there.
I haven't exactly been honest with you.
The thought clearly pained him, but I don't think as much as it did me. You lied to me? He winced.
Not overtly.
He straightened his back, then turned and looked me in the eye.
But by omission, yes.
I picked up his glass off the floor and headed to the bar. Fortification was clearly in order, a ruse to give me time to process. His voice followed me.
I thought I could handle it. I even believed I still had it under control when Cho showed up.
I didn't say anything as I stood in front of the racks of bottles, all expensive, all with the anesthetizing power I was looking for. I chose my poison and refreshed his, adding 1 fresh cube of ice. I handed him a fresh drink, then took mine to my normal position in front of the window, a bit of distance in case I felt like doing something I'd regret. The champagne hadn't had enough octane for this conversation. This time, I opted for a tumbler of wild turkey. Old habits died hard. My father had lied to me about casino business. Tell me about Cho. He's not really a Chinese diplomat, is he? That's why I wasn't notified of his arrival.
No, not a diplomat. Only half Chinese.
My father shifted. I watched his reflection in the glass, one of his nervous tics.
He's mostly Macanese, one of the power players.
I didn't like the way my father said that. Which strings does he pull?
He's a junket dealer. Runs a real shady operation called Panda 777. Has his fingers in a bunch of pies, all rotten. If there's a bad angle to play, he's in on it. He's like somebody I knew back in the day.
Not the time for a swing down memory lane.
Maybe it is.
He took a sip of his drink, his thoughts parading across his face.
He's like one of the wise guys, throwing his weight around, intimidating everyone, killing those who don't bow to the pressure. He's got some game going on in Macau, in our property. We need to shut him down.
But not get caught by the government looking like we are one of the players.
Exactly.
My father looked defeated. I wasn't feeling it. Maybe it was the wild turkey. Maybe it was being cut loose from the bonds of fair play. Nothing like having nothing to lose to free one up to do what was necessary. Clearly, my father warred with himself. He glanced toward the hallway down which Mona had disappeared. Lowering his voice, he said,
"You need help in Macau."
I thought of Miss Minnie's Sinjin. I think I have a bead on that.
There are all kinds of help, Lucky.
He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees as he stared out the window, the lights of the strip painting his features.
In Macau, life is not as precious as it is here. It's merely another commodity that, after it is gone, its absence can be repaid.
Meaning?
Some there kill without thought, knowing they can pay the price to the family.
He let me absorb that for a moment.
You will need someone you can trust to have your back. Many will see you as a problem to be eliminated.
All the juice I'd felt from the bolt of anger melted out of me. Well, it won't be the first time.
Go see Vito Morgenstern.
Vito? Morgenstern? I would have laughed if he hadn't looked so pained.
His mother was Jewish.
My father acted like that explained everything.
He crossed some lines. Had to leave Vegas.
And how do you know him? He licked his lips, a nervous habit.
We were partners.
My eyebrows shot upward. First I'd heard of a partner. Really?
Don't believe everything he tells you.
Which of course meant it all was true, and it meant I'd be wading in where this Pollyanna didn't want to go. Sure. My father did not look happy. He knew that monosyllabic response was my way of saying, hell no.
I know you're angry, he said. Rightfully so. I've played this hand too far. Vegas was one thing. Macau, a whole other ballgame half a world away. I'm out of my depth.
And resorting to my penchant for cliches.
Apparently you're rubbing off on me.
Not enough, but I didn't say so. My father would always be a bit of a gunslinger. I liked to exact my revenge a bit more precisely. Better odds that way. What's Cho's angle? Laundering? Game on the side?
He's running a laundering operation out of the Panda junket room at the hotel. I know it's true. Our auditors found it.
What exactly is he doing?
The gamut, I suspect. We're just digging into it now. But so far we've seen evidence of politically exposed persons putting huge sums into play.
I'm assuming they were never reported to the Macanese authorities? My father shook his head. That alone was enough to put our gaming concession in jeopardy. What else? My father waved a hand as if swatting at a fly.
Allegations of wiring anomalies, lots of cash flowing through the casino, but not much of it being put into play. All the stuff the Macanese government takes a dim view of.
We're still in business, so I'm assuming they don't know about it.
Not yet.
And the auditors sniffing it out prompted a visit from Mr. Cho. You threatened his business, so we threatened yours.
Pretty much.
My mind whirled. We couldn't ask the authorities for help. Mr. Cho had seen to that. As my thoughts turned to other possibilities, I must have smiled.
When you smile like that, I don't know whether to be happy or scared as hell.
Me either. But I do like a bit of revenge, don't you? I turned my back to the strip. We need to give Mr. Cho a taste of his own game.
How?
Not sure yet. I took a slug of bourbon, which brought tears to my eyes and a welcomed burn all the way to my stomach. It had been a while. I felt a bit more like me. But we do have one thing Mr. Cho wants.
What's that?
His son, Frank. My father pursed his lips.
I've got a few markers I can call in. Maybe get him remanded to you. It's a long shot.
I'm already on it. Romeo is out at Indian Springs as we speak. I used my influence with the FBI. My father looked impressed. It's a new world, Dad. He seemed to wilt a bit. Nobody liked to have their waning relevance rubbed in their face.
Clever. But you do understand, if the play in Macau goes south, we could lose everything.